broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Simon Marks, and here are the top headlines of this Monday. President Volodymyr Zelensky urges world powers to do their best to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine by the end of the year, as G7 leaders plan new sanctions and pledge more support for his country. G7 leaders express serious concerns over Russia's plan to deliver missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads to Belarus in the coming months. France wants oil from Iran and Venezuela back on the market as it urges oil-producing nations to boost their output to help bring down crude prices fueled by the war in Ukraine. Crisis hits Sri Lanka struggles to maintain its fuel reserves. The government shuts schools, urges people to work from home to save fuel as queues for petrol mount amid a severe shortage. And Italy's second richest man, Leonardo Del Vecchio, has died. The 87-year-old eyewear magnate built an optical empire that included major brands like Ray-Ban, Persol and Oakley.
The world's richest countries come together for the G7 summit in Germany. The summit happens amidst the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Its impact on food and commodity prices. Can the G7 change the course of war? Can it deal with the shortages of food and energy? Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been invited for the summit as a special invitee. Follow me, Siddhant Sibbal, as I bring you all the live and latest updates on the big G7 summit only on WION from Germany.
While leaders of the world's 7 wealthiest economies have gathered in the German state of Bavaria for the annual G7 summit, the focus of this meeting, the war in Ukraine, while other issues like trade and climate adaptation are also being discussed alongside. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed virtually the G7 leaders earlier today, where he called for more military support and urged the leaders to help end the war before 2023. The gathering has been marked by a show of unity and closeness among the 7 leaders. The host, Germany, has also extended an invitation to 5 partner nations to take part in the meeting, among them being India.
Discussing all the topics that are on the agenda, especially staying united in supporting the Ukraine against the Russian aggression. And we understood that the policies of all our countries are very much aligned. And this is, I think, the good message, that we are taking tough decisions, that we are also cautious, that we will help the Ukraine as much as is possible, but that we also avoid that there will be a big conflict between Russia and NATO. And this is what is of essence, to be tough and thinking about the necessities of the time we are living in.
Ahead of the meeting, world powers agreed to ban gold imports from Russia. Discussions are also being held to put a price cap on Russian oil imports and fresh sanctions on Russia's defense sector. In between diplomatic parleys, the G7 leaders were seen enjoying a light moment when they took a dig at Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Jackie Top. Can we just can we take our clothes off? Let's wait for the speaker. All have to show them a tough Putin. Get the bare chest horseback ride. Oh yes.
So I think everybody came to the G7 in Germany really hearing a lot about Ukraine fatigue, the anxieties of other countries around the world about the continuing war, the effect on food prices, on energy prices. And what's really struck me in the last couple of days has been the amazing consistency of our resolve, the continuing unity of the G7.
Ahead of the meeting, world powers agreed to ban gold imports from Russia. Discussions are also being held to put a price cap on Russian oil imports and fresh sanctions on Russia's defense sector. We also know that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed virtually the G7 leaders earlier today, where he called for more military support and urged the leaders to help end the war before 2023. The gathering has been marked by a show of unity and closeness among the 7 leaders. The host, Germany, has also extended an invitation to 5 partner nations to take part in the meeting, among them being India. And we are also eyeing the NATO meeting in Madrid, which will begin in the next 2 days. And some of these leaders are also discussing the Ukraine-Russia war and how it is, dominating some of the talks in these summits. My name is Eric Njoka. You are watching WION World is One. This news continues from America with Simon Marks.
Well, thanks very much indeed. And I am delighted to say that we are now joined by WION's correspondent Susan Tehrani in New York, who's been observing events at the G7 summit. Susan, how complicated is it for President Biden to navigate the G7 and then the NATO summit in Madrid, given that shortly before he left the United States, of course, we saw that Supreme Court decision, which we're going to talk about later in the programme, on abortion. President Biden likes to say that the US has shared values with G7 members, but it was notable over the weekend that a couple of them, Emmanuel Macron of France and Justin Trudeau of Canada, certainly didn't seem to think that those shared values extended particularly far at the moment.
Right, President Biden, and it's not only the president, but G7 members really are struggling right now to try to find a solution, not only to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and their efforts have really not been able to stop Putin from his ongoing invasion, but they're also trying to really tackle the economic hardship that invasion and other issues have put on the international communities, on their countries as well. And it does come at a time when President Biden is not particularly popular, not only among other leaders that he's sitting at the table with, but among his own people here in the United States as well. So yes, there are a lot of problems to address, but many analysts believe that perhaps the best way that the United States, and to the most part, maybe the allies as well, can push an agenda forward and maybe have some sort of success during G7, and then we can talk about NATO a little bit later, is that they can sort of frame this meeting as a support for the UN Charter, a non-intervention agenda, a sovereignty framework agenda, if you may, as opposed to sort of an agenda that's focused on democracy versus autocracy, because that way, you know, first of all, more countries will join in, and second of all, you know, maybe perhaps the president, not only because of issues facing here at home, but also because, you know, let's not forget, he also has an upcoming trip to a country like Saudi Arabia. He'll sort of be immune to criticism regarding that as well. And more countries perhaps will join in and be more comfortable in, you know, having an alliance, not only in the situation of Russia, where they won't be forced to take sides, but also in dealing with China as well.
OK, Susan, stay with us. We're going to come back to you later on the broadcast to discuss the latest on the abortion ruling. But I want to go to Bavaria itself now and to WION's Siddhant Sebel, who is there observing the G7 summit. And Siddhant, give us an update. How has the day gone so far and what lies ahead?
Well, in terms of the two key focus areas, first has been the message by President Zelensky. Almost 2 hours he spent with the G7 leaders virtually talking about and requesting for air defense missile system, for which it seems that United States is working on a package, something that the US NSA has just said in a briefing. Secondly, of course, is the outreach summit, where leaders from the 5 countries when it comes to India, Indonesia, Senegal, South Africa and Argentina are participating. The Indian Prime Minister has participated in the first session and has had talked about his focus areas, but also number of bilaterals he is having. So it has been a packed day so far at the G7 site. But also we can expect in next few hours focus on the key outcomes, especially when it comes to Indian Prime Minister's engagement with the Indonesian president. Remember, Indonesia is the chair of the G20 and India will be the next chair of G20. So both sides will be keen that there are engagements and both sides can work together on how to make sure that there is a successful G20 summit both this year and next year, given we know that the West is not very keen to have the Russian president on board at the summit. So a lot of things on the annual, on the day 2 of the G7 summit, but focus will be on the outcomes, especially what the G7 leaders can do in terms of delivery to Ukraine and in terms of messaging to Moscow.
Siddhant Sebel, live for us at the G7 summit in Bavaria. Thank you very much indeed for that update. Now we're going to return to the United States and the fallout from last Friday's Supreme Court ruling on abortion. The ruling, of course, struck down Roe versus Wade, and it sent shockwaves across the country. It directly impacts the lives of over 30 million women in America and their access to care. The landmark ruling that has kept abortion legal from coast to coast for 50 years was overturned by the Conservative majority on the 9-member bench, including 3 Trump appointees. Multiple protests were held across the US throughout the weekend, and pride parades, music festivals and other social gatherings saw many attendees expressing criticism of the Supreme Court's move.
We are at this point in this country where established precedent and established laws that have been guiding for 50 years gone overnight, it seems. And I mean, honestly, I am nervous with elections coming up, with like midterms coming up, with a future presidential election coming up, with a conservative majority in the judicial system. You do say, is gay marriage next?
US President Joe Biden called on Americans to vote for Democrats in the upcoming midterm polls, saying if they want to protect abortion rights, he is promising to use any majority that he secures to codify those rights into federal law. But successive Democrats in the White House have made that pledge before and never acted on it. So, back to WION's Susan Tehrani, who is still with us live from New York. And Susan, it was noticeable, certainly here in Washington, D.C. over the weekend, that a number of younger protesters who under normal circumstances you would assume would hew to President Biden's message were actually challenging this idea that the November midterm elections are going to resolve all of this, because they seem to lack confidence in him and some of his predecessors, who, of course, up until now have failed to codify those rights into federal law.
Right. It's interesting because I think this generation has become very informed regarding law. When it comes to issues like abortion, like gay rights, and so on and so forth. And they understand that codifying something like Roe is extremely difficult because, not to go into the historic aspect of it and the legality of it, but Roe really was overturned back in 1992, some of it. And then, there was a case, Planned Parenthood Casey, that came and sort of, kept some aspects of Roe. So they understand that it's very difficult to codify Roe. So, for example, when President Biden and his party is using something like Roe to say, come make donations right now to the Democratic Party for November, this makes this younger generation extremely angry that, I don't need to give, for example, $15 to President Joe Biden when I know that it's going to be extremely difficult to have some kind of legislation to codify Roe. But that being said, we are going to see more grassroots activism regarding abortion moving towards November. Remember, the overturning of Roe was the product of 50 years of activism on the one hand. And on the other hand, the federal constitution really is a base, is not a ceiling. So to overturn some sort of rules and regulations on a state level is going to be a lot easier than on a federal level. And I think that this generation, the younger generation, as we saw during the weekend, the ones that took to the street and were interviewed, I think they understand that. And I think that this might really set a benchmark right now to perhaps make some changes in many states. We'll wait and see. But the fact that abortion is being sent back to the states might actually play to the favor of the generation to come. So we'll wait and see.
Well, it was certainly notable over the weekend, Susan, that many people were expressing great resentment over the amount of fundraising that was taking place off the back of this Supreme Court decision. Susan Tehrani, live for us today in New York. Thanks very much indeed for that. Pride Month is being celebrated across the globe, but in Turkey, the government is toughening its stance against the LGBTQ community and their rights. Almost 200 Pride participants and LGBTQ activists were first detained and then released after participating in a banned Pride march in Istanbul. Turkish police broke up the Pride march after demonstrators gathered in defiance of a ban at Taksim Square. The detainees were loaded into buses and were reportedly denied access to lawyers by the authorities. Beyoğlu district authorities banned all Pride Week events this month, claiming that those events could lead to public unrest. But the Istanbul Bar Association said peaceful demonstrations cannot be banned. So hundreds of protesters carrying rainbow flags pressed ahead with the rally, even as public transportation in the area was shut down. Homosexuality is not a crime in Turkey. Over the past few years, the Erdogan administration has toughened its stance against the community, and the last Pride March was held in 2014.
Kardeşlerim, burası Türkiye. Anlı şanlı Türkiye.
Amid a global food crisis due to the war in Ukraine, Egypt has announced that it will procure 180,000 tonnes of wheat from India. Egypt is one of the world's biggest wheat importers. It has received much of its grain from the Black Sea, but in recent months those imports have been disrupted because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The crisis has further raised wheat import costs. Egypt mainly relies on imported wheat to further subsidise bread for its 70 million people. The Egyptian Minister of Supply, Ali Mosseli, says that the deal with India is part of the country's effort to diversify supplies. India earlier banned wheat exports due to lower production. That ban took place in May, but it made allowances for countries like Egypt with food security needs. Separately, Egypt is also looking at ways to obtain more flour from grain by raising the extraction percentage of flour used for subsidised bread to 87.5% from 82%. This could further save around 500,000 tonnes of imported wheat for the year. Another idea that Egypt is testing, supplementing wheat flour with potatoes, for which the country is looking at new technology. As of now, the current wheat reserves are sufficient for almost 6 months. As Afghanistan tries to recoup from the catastrophic earthquake last week, Taliban officials visited areas in the Khost and Paktika provinces to meet people who lost their family members and homes in the tragedy. The United Nations Permanent Representative to Afghanistan also visited the quake-hit zone. He was accompanied by other members of the global organisation.
What a sign of resilience, what a sign of courage, what a sign of resolve in face of this adversity. I would say endless adversity, endless difficulty, endless tragedy. And yet these people are so gracious, so strong, and they're willing to overcome. And it's just our obligation, moral obligation, professional obligation, religious obligation, to be here to help these people. Because they deserve it. They deserve more, they deserve better.
Afghanistan has received aid from several countries, including its South Asian neighbours. India sent 60 trucks carrying 3,000 tonnes of wheat from its northern Atari town for crisis-hit Afghanistan as part of its pledge to supply 50,000 tonnes of wheat after the Taliban takeover. Earlier, Qatar sent 13 tonnes of food aid on a military plane to be distributed in the hardest-hit region. The Taliban administration has appealed to the international community for more aid. It's urged the West to roll back sanctions and lift a freeze on central bank assets that was instated to limit the Taliban and push them for inclusive rule.
مکتبونه مدرسې ټول مسجد ټول خراب دي کلی ټول خراب دي او د خوراک د څښاک اوبه نشته هر څه یې منځ تللي دي په لحاظه اوس دپاره ټول نړمبای خیمې ته ډېر ضرورت دی او ځکه چې دا کورونه اوس هم زلزلې روانې دي تاسو نن هم زخمیان شوي پرون هم نوي زخمیان شوي ځکه چې نوي حرکت د زلزلې ټکونه شته.
The Taliban regime has pledged not to interfere with international aid after reports that the Islamist group was not allowing aid to be sent to the quake-hit region. According to official figures, more than 1,000 people were killed and about 2,000 severely injured in last week's disaster. Now, last year, when the Taliban took over in Afghanistan, we witnessed thousands of people fleeing the country in a desperate bid to secure their futures. Among them was a Taekwondo player who fled to France.
Born in Iran while in exile, Hamidi is once again on the run. She has escaped the Taliban-ruled Afghanistan and has now settled in Paris. Despite the hardships and the turmoil that she has faced, Hamidi did not give up on her training. She is still training as a Taekwondo athlete and aims to represent her country in one of the biggest sports events, the Olympics. Her pursuit to participate in the Games aligns with her place of refuge, as Paris is set to host the 2024 Summer Olympics.
When I was in Afghanistan, I was doing sport to make my people proud, for the women and for myself. But it did not happen, and once again I became a refugee. Because I was born in exile, still I practiced for the same goal, especially after the arrival of the Taliban. I decided to work harder than before and go to the Olympics to be proud of my country.
As she gets back to training away from home and in a new country, Hamidi has joined the International Olympic Committee's refugee team, which competed for the first time at the 2016 Rio Games.
Marzieh came back after a long break, with everything that happened to her without practicing. So physically, she's going to have to work on getting back into shape and getting her weight back up and her physique back to the maximum. On the other hand, she has very good technique. Her kicking techniques are really good. So we need to re-athletize Marzieh, and with the technical background she has, it will be perfect to start competing again. And we'll do everything we can do to support her in her project to take part in the Paris 2024 Olympics.
Despite embarking on a new chapter thousands of kilometers away from her home, the Taekwondo champion has said that she will remain in touch with the girls who could not flee from the Taliban and have not been able to practice the sport. She emphasized on how the world is silent about the atrocities in Afghanistan and focused on athletes who have been heavily ignored.
I'm in touch with all the Taekwondo girls who are stuck in Afghanistan and no one has helped them. They are becoming frustrated every day. They cannot do sports, they cannot study, and worse than that, the world is silent about what is happening to the women in Afghanistan, and no one, nor any institution, has helped women athletes, and they have been very much ignored.
The athlete has promised to achieve her Olympic dream in Paris in 2024 and has vowed to become the voice of the oppressed and those who were forced to give up on their dreams.
And that's the Monday edition of WION Live Broadcast. From Washington, D.C., we will give the world another spin in the Tuesday edition. Same time, same place. Till then, stay with WION for all your news updates. World is one.
There are many other... this is right, Arab.